Terry Funk died yesterday, and I wanted to do a video kind of giving my thoughts on Terry Funk. And here's a guy who, I mean, what more can be said about Terry Funk that hasn't already been said? But I want to give you kind of my story, or at least, my memories of Terry Funk. Because here's a guy who I've watched since I was a little kid. So he passed away. Here's a guy who is in every single professional wrestling Hall of Fame ever. He's been in movies. He's been in TV shows. He's even done cameos in TV shows that I watched as a kid. He was like the one wrestler that did the most cameos. Like you'd see Terry Funk in these like anthology horror shows. You'd see him have small roles here and there. He was, not the first wrestler to ever do Hollywood, but one of the ones that adapted to it pretty quickly. Obviously, in Amarillo, Terry Funk was a local legend. Him, Dory, his brother, and Dory Sr., their dad, ran that territory for a very long time. And even after the territory shut down, they were always known as being the family from the Double Cross Ranch in Texas. Amarillo, Texas, man. So I first found Terry Funk when I was a little kid. My dad got me this VHS tape of this show it was called Wrestle War, the Music City Showdown. Now, those of you who are wrestling fans, you know about this show already. I have to tell you. But this was actually my first exposure to wrestling that was not World Wrestling Federation. I was a WWF kid. I didn't get into NWA, WCW until much later, but this was the first time that I had ever seen any other kind of wrestling. And as you know, one of the big matches on that show, really the main event, even though it didn't close the show, was Ric Flair versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I didn't know that they had two other classic matches. I got the tape after the show had already aired live. Obviously, it was a actual tape with a box and everything. I still have that tape, by the way. And after the match, Terry Funk appears and challenges Ric Flair. Ric Flair tells him, Terry, you've been in Hollywood making movies. We have a line of challengers. I respect you, but, get in line. Terry Funk didn't like that. It leads to Terry Funk cheap shotting him and pile driving him on top of a table. This is not one of the pro wrestling quote unquote gimmick tables. And this is years before ECW and the Public Enemy really changed the business by having tables be a thing. People who don't understand the history of wrestling oftentimes credit the Dudley Boys for being the guys who curated the tables. And while the Dudley Boys certainly did popularize it during the later years, Public Enemy did it first. They were the ones that had tables matches. But before any of that, he does a pile driver on Ric Flair on a table. Now again, this table did not break like a lot of the tables would in wrestling, the gimmick tables. You could hear Flair's skull cracking, as Jim Ross said. So Funk had turned heel, and that was my first time ever seeing Terry Funk. He went on, of course, to have a tremendous feud with Ric Flair, both having great matches, both at the Great American Bash 89 and of course, the Clash of the Champions New York Knockout. And Terry, did commentary in the 90s, and I really got to know Terry in ECW after that. He was their legend. Every wrestling company had a couple of legends, older guys who were there to teach the young guys. Obviously, AEW has guys like Chris Jericho. You've also got guys like, they might not be active wrestlers, but Arn Anderson's there, Jerry Lynn. Jericho's the one that still wrestles. Terry Funk was ECW's sort of living legend to help mentor the young guys and bring them along and make them better. And that's something Terry did. But little did I know that before that, Terry had an incredible career in Japan, specifically in All Japan Pro Wrestling and later FMW. And then, of course, he would be known to a lot of fans who first started watching during the Monday Night War as being Chainsaw Charlie, the tag partner of Cactus Jack. And there he probably had more eyeballs on him when it came to cable television than maybe at any other point since those NWA days. I remember he had a great match with Cactus Jack going into the Over the Edge pay-per-view where Vince McMahon had manipulated Cactus into destroying his own best friend. Terry Funk, of course, was a mentor to Mick Foley. They had matches in Japan, and I remember when I first had access to order things over the internet, one of the first things that I purchased is I bought some FMW, and then I bought IWA King of the Deathmatch from IVP Videos. That was one of the first things I bought because they had shown some of the footage on WWF TV, and I was mesmerized by this brand of extreme, ultra-violent, hardcore wrestling. Even though it's not my favorite style, when you're like 13 years old and you see something like that and you've never seen it before, you're like, whoa. There were kids who told me they thought that was real. Oh no, this is real. This is not fake like that other stuff. That WWF stuff's all fake. This is real. And I get why they would say that, because even in the other companies, the injuries are real. The athleticism is real. Obviously, it's still predetermined, but Terry Funk, one of his most famous quotes that Terry Funk said, and I think Cornette may have been the one to say this in an interview, is he said, I might not be able to convince them that it's real, but I can convince them that I'm real. And that's a big deal. That's something that's powerful. What it basically means is you have to get so into your character that it becomes a part of who you are. You can't play a character that isn't you. Obviously, if you're a trained actor and if you take classes, there are ways of doing this, but you can't play somebody else and you're more natural and more comfortable playing yourself, or at least a version of yourself. Take Steve Austin. The real Steve Austin is a guy who drinks beer, drives a pickup truck, and, kind of a tough redneck. That's who the guy really is. Steve Williams is that guy. The Rock was this, flashy, well, maybe not now, but back in those days, he was this sort of smooth-talking, handsome jock, and that's who he was. And that's who The Rock was with the volume turned up. And that's Terry, man. Terry was... Oh, you egg-sucking dog. I do a very bad Terry Funk impression. You egg-sucking dog. I learned more about Terry Funk from my elders. When I mean by elders, I mean people around me that were older, because I live in the Florida area, and I was told about the great Terry Funk and the feuds he had with Dusty Rhodes in the 70s. Terry Funk once paralyzed half of Dusty Rhodes' face in an angle. Terry Funk was a hated villain down here, but he was respected. And the older guys, when I said Terry Funk, they would look at the TV screen and be like, he's still wrestling? I remember when I was a kid he was wrestling. The dude had a long career. And let's not even forget the hundreds of retirement matches he had. He had the Terry Funk retirement shows was like a thing that was an ongoing gag among wrestling fans. But man, was he respected, man. He was so respected. And every time that I saw Terry Funk or listened to him talk about whatever, I always listened, because here's a guy who was really, he's like, in many ways, like a bridge. He's a guy who was successful in every decade. He worked the territory system. He was able to bridge over into the rock and wrestling era. He was there at WrestleMania 2. And in the mid-'80s, he went to Japan, worked the All-Japan style with a little bit of American, of course, mixed in there. Wrestled for the NWA again in the late 80s, the Jim Crockett Promotions when it was WCW. Left again, did ECW, went back to WCW in the mid-'90s, which he was also in ECW. Then went to the WWF, and he came back again in the 2000s for like ECW One Night Stand 06. The dude has successfully wrestled. He might be the only guy I can think of, except for maybe like a Ric Flair, who's been successful in like 6 decades. You have to understand, not a lot of guys have that. When the territory system ended, a lot of guys were out of work. A lot of guys went overseas or just did something else with their life. Not Terry, man. Terry, he stuck around the business and is one of the few guys who is universally respected. Universally respected. And I have always respected him. He's always been one of my favorite guys from that era. And it really is a bummer. His wife, Vicky, who you see on Beyond the Mat, great documentary if you haven't seen it. She passed away in 2019. And I know that, man, when you are married to somebody for a really long time, look into this if you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you're married to someone for a really long time, and they die, it takes a piece of you with them. That's why a lot of times you'll see older couples, one dies, in a few years the other one dies. Or sometimes faster. Like, there is such thing as dying from heartbreak. When you've been with somebody that long, it's almost like your body, your will, and I didn't understand this when I was younger. I talked to a lot of older people about this who explained it to me, like your willingness to live goes down. I can tell you with my own parents. My mother died. My dad went into a very deep depression. He didn't die right away. He died, a few years later, about what, 6 years later, 7 years later, he died. But he lasted because he wanted to see me kind of, grow. But he was devastated. He was depressed. I mean, he went through a lot, man. So I can only imagine what Terry had gone through losing his spouse. He still had his kids, I'm sure. But now he's gone, hopefully reunited with his wife, if you believe in that. I'd like to believe in it, and I do. I hope so. I really do. I'm not the big man upstairs who's in charge of that. He lived till 79, and you know what, man? I had a chance to see him wrestle locally a couple of years ago, and I didn't, and I regret it. He actually wrestled Jerry the King Lawler, and I missed it, and I regret that. Because that was also a great feud in Memphis in the 80s. This guy, Terry Funk, worked everywhere, yo. So today, go on YouTube and type in some Terry Funk stuff and see what you find. You're going to find some good stuff, I promise you that. Anyways, that's what I think, y'all. Take care. I'll see you this weekend. I'm doing an all-in review on Sunday, and I'll be talking more about Ahsoka. Not Asuka, Ahsoka soon. Take care.